Welcome to the Telos Care Podcast, where faith meets formation. Thanks for joining us today as we have conversations around biblical counseling and how to bring hope and healing to a hurting world.
I want to begin talking to you about emotion. And I want to talk to you about how to step into your emotion. Because a lot of times we just don't want to deal with emotion, or it becomes overwhelming to us, or it becomes chaotic to us. And so a lot of times what we will do is we will stuff that stuff down, right? We will numb ourselves to it. But here's what I'll tell you. You start numbing yourself to the bad stuff or the stuff that's out of control, the things that feel overwhelming to you. You then start numbing yourself to the good stuff, to being able to be present with your kids, or to share a moment with someone you care about, or to get deeper in a relationship. And so the pain hurts so bad, all I know to do is to numb it and to press it down. But when I do that, I become this walking zombie, and I can't connect with my kids or my spouse or anybody else in my life that actually cares about me. And life goes by, and what you'll find, you'll go through years of your life and you'll look back, if you've done this, if you've numbed emotion, and there'll be blocks of time you won't even remember because you've just numbed the emotion. You've pushed it down so far that you've just gone through life like a zombie. Can any of you relate to that? Yeah. And it's like, where the heck, in my life, I would say, where did the 90s go? I miss the 90s. The 80s for you. But it's like blocks of time because emotionally you weren't present, you weren't available. And you did this adaptively. You're hurting so bad and it was so difficult. You just press it down. So what do? We get lost in addiction. And that comes in a lot of forms. Don't think it's just substances. I mean, addiction it's like an octopus. It has all of these tentacles, whether it's pornography, whether it's gambling, you name it. There are so many things that can grab you and suck you down into a hole, and you just don't feel anything. So I want to talk to you about how to experience your emotions appropriately and the value of that, and what happens sometimes, at the cost of pushing and suppressing those feelings and emotions down. So let me give you a quote. This is an old quote by a famous psychologist. You'll know the name, Sigmund Freud. Now, Freud said a lot of weird stuff. I'm not going to defend him, but he also said a lot of brilliant things. This is a brilliant statement. He said, unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. He said, unexpressed emotions will never die. You push them down, you suppress them, and they just come back uglier. They come back louder. They scream at us. Can you relate to that? A lot of times we think about emotions in the context, well, there's good ones and there's bad ones. And I would say that is a myth. All emotions are emotions. God gave you emotions. They're part of who you are. It's part of the human experience. And the healthiest people, the most successful people, the people that are the most centered in life have learned how to integrate their emotions in a healthy way, in an appropriate way, and they're in touch with themselves. So for example, you may say, I don't like it when I get angry. Someone triggers me. I just rage. Well, if you take that rage, if you take that anger and you channel it appropriately, you can really do some great things. That's how great causes come to the surface. One day, somebody got offended, mad, and stood up for themselves and said, I'm not sitting on the back of a bus. We've got a civil rights movement now. I mean, so you take emotion and you recycle it, you integrate it, you filter it into healthy expressions. I mean, on one side, lust is horrible. If it takes you into, if it takes you into a empty, abusive, defiled life, it's horrible. But if you take that passion and that love and you channel it into something that's great, your family, a cause, or whatever, then it becomes an amazing. It becomes a superpower for you. So again, there's no good and bad emotions. They're just emotions. What what's what's difficult or what's painful or what will not work for you is when you suppress them, push them down, ignore them, bury them, as Freud says, and they come up in uglier ways. So I can't deal with my irritability. I can't deal with my depression, my anxiety. What do? I start self-medicating. Well, let me just ask you a question because I know um, not for not for everybody in the room, but for many in the room today, you've dealt with significant addiction. And and when you start going back and you're dealing in your mind, where'd that come from? Why did that become so evident in my life? For some of you, there was no doubt a time when you were self-medicating because the anxiety, the depression, the irritability. Anybody fit in that category? Okay. So it wasn't just about feeling good or getting high. It was like, I can't even deal with the stuff in my body, in my emotions, or in my head. And so I start doing anything to block it, to bury it, to numb it. And then, once you get into to the to the cycle, which is pretty painful, the withdrawals are so intense that now, okay, it's not about my anxiety. My body is so messed up and I'm coming unglued physically, and just to feel normal, I need to keep using. And that's the sad part about this, right? I mean, typically, or what they say according to the statistics, is that most heroin users, and I'm talking about 83%, start out as someone who gets addicted to prescription meds. I mean, so what happens? Well, the dude's on a construction site and he, hurts his back. Or you get in a car wreck and you get whiplash, or you go to the dentist and you get the Percocet because the toothache is so painful, but the doctors prescribe opioids. So I mean, the Oxycontin, all of it, that's the go-to for the medical world. And when the prescription stops and you still need that med, you realize that I can get my opioid on the street. And, there it is. And, you go from heroin to fentanyl, whatever it takes, because shopping illicit drugs on the street costs a lot of money, but fentanyl is accessible. And so here's the doctor, here's the lawyer, here's the school teacher, here's the regular Joe, and they start out with a prescription. It's become an addiction, and now that person's got a needle in their arm, and they're in the same boat as any of the rest of us are. There's no discrimination with addiction, no matter where you're from, who your family was, how much money you got, how much money you don't got, no matter where your zip code is, it will find you. And so it has a tendency to begin at one place and then move like a cancer into other areas of your life. It begins typically exploration or a need, and then it becomes this powerful addiction. And what it does is it begins to rewire the brain chemistry, and now it's no longer just an interest, it's a need. And it affects us emotionally, it affects us intellectually, it affects the very chemistry of our body and our brain, the way we think. And that's why, from a medical community, you'll hear the terminology that addiction or alcoholism or substance abuse is a disease. And they say that because the chemistry of the brain and the physiology of the way we're wired gets reworked. Now, here's the news flash, that all of that is reversible. So I am not of the opinion that once you're an addict, you're always an addict, or once you're an alcoholic, that you're always an alcoholic. The neuroscience is really strong on this. The brain has neuroplasticity. In other words, it can bounce back. It's like a Nerf ball. You know, you can squeeze it and it comes back. So yeah, does the substances alter the brain chemistry? 100% yes. But can it be rewired? Absolutely, 100% yes. And so, why is that important to somebody like me? Because that aligns also with my faith view and the faith lens that I look at the world in, because the Bible tells us that in Christ, I am a new creature. I am a new creation. And old things are passed away and all things become new. And I can what? Renew my mind. So that was in the Bible a long time ago, before the neuroscience community discovered that the brain has neuroplasticity. Eventually, science catches up to the Bible. So I just think, as a person of faith, it's really great when you see those two things align, because the old mentality was, once you're an addict, you're always an addict. And the preachers and the gospel community would say, no, there's a change that you can have in Christ, and old things can be passed away, all things become new. And now we see, okay, science and the Bible align and are in agreement with this. So you're not broken, you're not damaged goods, you're not a diagnosis, you're not an addict, or you don't have to be. Good news, right? It's the best news ever. Uh, so let me talk to you a little bit about the components of emotion. 3 components with emotion. What makes up an emotion? 1, subjective feeling. 2, a physiological response. And 3, behavioral responses. So, what does all that mean? The subjective response of a feeling, or the subjective feelings, that's how I feel about this stuff. Now, you may feel differently than me, and we have a tendency to generalize, and we say, well, you're just too sensitive. That should make you upset. I went through the same thing. I didn't have a problem with it. Fine and dandy. But I have a right to my own subjective feelings about things. And so do you. So part of it is how I feel about stuff. And then there is a physiological response to emotions. If you're feeling anxious, you feel it in your body, right? You feel it in your gut. I mean, sometimes we get so fidgety physically. So there's a physiological component. If you're depressed, you can't even get out of bed sometimes. I'm not talking about a blue day. I'm talking about you're so overwhelmed and the cloud is so thick over you of depression that you can't function. You don't want to see anybody. And death would be a gift. Have you been there? Yeah. And then there are behavioral responses. So within emotion, there's a subjective feeling. This is the way I feel about it. Don't judge me for that. There's a physiological response. It's the way I feel in my body. And then there's a behavioral response. And so if I'm, and let me say this, with men and women, for example, men and women respond differently behaviorally to things like depression, anxiety. Depression, for example, a woman may seclude herself, not talk to anybody. She may, lose weight, not eat, or the opposite, eat a lot. Men, a lot of times, we don't know what to do with this thing called depression. And it generally comes out in irritability, anger, rage, and a lot of that type of behavior that we're more comfortable with is really the expression of depression. It really is. And then when you mix substances in that, my subjective feelings and my physiological responses and my behavioral responses are amplified typically, right? I mean, the volume's turned up or turned down. And sometimes, we buy into this, if I just have a drink, I'm going to calm down. It's going to relax me. And yeah, that does happen. Maybe with the first drink, right? But then you have the second drink and you're feeling down. You start talking to everybody about your problem. Round 3, I'm going to knock your head off now. Because suddenly I've become 10 feet tall and bulletproof. That's a reality check soon to be, right? So let me move this a little bit further, because there is some science behind this. And I want to talk to you about the amygdala. Okay, that's a part of your brain. So let me do this. Let me give you an illustration of the brain. So let's say that my hand, my fist here is your brain. This is what I'm going to call my handy model of the brain, right? Okay, that is a joke. Here, this part right here is this. It's your prefrontal cortex. It's the intellectual part of you. It's the thinking part of you. It's where all of the executive functions are happening. It's where you're creative. It's where you can problem solve. It's where you can think ahead and you can strategize. It's a beautiful part of your brain. It's the most advanced part of your brain. But inside that, deep inside your brain, beneath the prefrontal cortex, is the amygdala, and it's wrapped around what they call the limbic system, and that's the emotional part of your brain. That's the feeling part of your brain. And then you have the stem back here, and that's the reactive part of your brain. So what happens when I get triggered, when I get upset, when I perceive threat or danger, I literally flip my lid, because I'm not thinking up here. I'm not being creative. I'm not problem solving. I'm not using good judgment. I'm going right immediately to the amygdala. I'm emotional about this thing. And then I go back here to a reactive state. And so all I'm doing is reacting, not responding. That is what we call fight or flight. And this has been researched for years and years and years now, we have these sophisticated brain scans, and we have an idea now of how the brain functions. Years ago, they used to say things like this: you only use 10% of your brain. And if you'd use 100% of your brain, you'd be a genius. But the truth is, we use 100% of our brain all the time. It's all working, every little piece of it. And so the amygdala, which is deep down in the middle of that, that little lobe of gray mush, the amygdala, what we know about the amygdala is that is where you store your memories. That is where you are the most emotional. And it's also called the pleasure center of your brain. And so these brain scans are really interesting. It's like, here's your brain on drugs. Well, your brain on drugs, it's lighting up that amygdala, or it's shutting it down, depending on what you're taking or what you're on or where you're at. If you're traumatized and you've got significant trauma and pain about a memory, we know that that is occurring down in the amygdala. And what happens when I get triggered again, I go from this part of my brain to that emotional part of my brain to the reactive part of my brain, like really fast. It's the way we're made. Now, you are made and designed by God like that to save your life. If you perceive threat or danger, if someone comes up and they're aggressive towards you, you're going to have an immediate reaction. A car pulls out in front of you, you're going to slam the brakes and swerve. It's an immediate reaction. God designed us like that. But what happens in my life, whether you are a little bitty young person and you experience domestic violence, you learn to respond. And now you're an adult person and you're still responding that way. You go right back to that place. Or even in your adult life, because not all trauma, begins and happens and affects us in childhood. Sometimes it happens, in our adult life. You can be traumatized. You could have had the best childhood in the world. It could have been Leave It to Beaver at your house. But as an adult, you went through something awful. Your world was turned upside down. You were hurt. You experienced injustice. Someone beat you up. You experienced, maybe you're a vet and you saw a war zone. Whatever it is, those events traumatize us and we get stuck in that fight or flight. And being stuck in fight or flight is like, it'd be like that, alarm system always going off. I can't shut it off. I'm always in fight or flight. And then the slightest little thing makes me explode or makes me shut down or makes me run away. Think fight, flight, or freeze. Those are the typical human responses. And when I get in that mode, if I have a history of substance use, yes, it is a trigger to relapse. If I have a history of running away, I quit the job, I walk out of the relationship, I hit the street when things are difficult. If I'm the fight versus the flight, get ready, something's going down. Things are going to start swinging. Boom. You become the Incredible Hulk. And so the amygdala is extremely important as far as our emotional well-being is concerned. Let me just kind of give you a few functions of the amygdala. It's the center of your anxiety. It's where you're socially able to connect as well. It's where your emotion, they're good parts of it. I mean, because we're talking about emotion, right? But it also can be this fear response, fear conditioning part of us. And when you're dysregulated emotionally, it's because the amygdala is online and it's taken over. It's what some psychologists will call the amygdala hijack. Because now I got triggered, I feel anxious, I feel angry, I feel all of these things, and I'm reactive, and the amygdala is in the driver's seat. I'm not up here. So how do you beat that? Well, I realized that when I'm dysregulated and I'm reactive and the amygdala is taking over, I'm not making good decisions. I'm probably doing things that will hurt others and hurt myself in the long run. And so I can't think rationally. I can't problem solve. I'm not being creative about this situation. I'm just reactive. And so what I have to do, what I have to learn to do is get my body back into regulation. And sometimes that means taking some deep breaths. Sometimes that means taking a walk, doing some push ups, whatever it takes. Some people do yoga, some people do all kinds of things, but whatever it is that you have found that brings you back to regulation, now I'm thinking, I can understand, I'm responding rather than reacting. Life is a lot better. But if I'm in that reactive state because I'm dysregulated and the amygdala has hijacked me, I'm probably going to have a lot of cleanup afterward. Thoughts on that? Make sense? All right. A few technical terms there. That's the way that works. So um, if I were to show you the amygdala under stress, it would be brain scans with a lot of lit up things. Now, how do substances, drugs, and trauma affect the brain? Huge ways. One, we know that the short-term effects are typically an altered mood. And remember, we're talking about the amygdala, it's where all the emotion is happening. If your poison of choice is cocaine, you're going for the euphoria. If you're more of the guy that's moving, toward cannabis, you want to come down, you want to mellow out, you want to relax. Substances affect the way your brain functions, and there's just no way to get around that. It ultimately, short-term affects judgment and decision making. So when I am introducing a substance, my judgment is impaired naturally. And it also increases things like anxiety and paranoia. And my experience working in clinical settings is when individuals are coming in and they're detoxing and they're going through the withdrawals, it's not only just the physical stuff that's happening and it looks like you're 1 minute from death, but there's this increased paranoia, hallucinations, delusional thinking. It's not that you're schizophrenic, but you have schizophrenic type symptoms at that moment coming off that stuff. Been there, done that? Can you relate to that? So if you've experienced that, don't think, well, I must be schizophrenic because when I was in the clinic and I was coming clean, I was seeing things, I was hearing things, and yeah, sure you were, because you were coming off of this and your amygdala was flipping out. And so that's why you've got to have a complete fast. And with any substance, you need a fast of at least 30 days before you're able to reason and think, okay, am I ready to commit to recovery and sobriety? Am I ready to do the work? Until you get to that point where the substance is out, you're not ready to make that level of commitment, because the judgment, the decision making, it's offline, and the amygdala is in control. The rule of thumb is I got to get you to 30 days clean before I can really sit down and get you to commit to a recovery plan. And keeping you 30 days clean ain't going to happen if you've got access to the street. That's why a center can be very beneficial for somebody. But then you got to stay in that committed place. So, okay, so even 30 days, let's say, let's just use that as a baseline. That doesn't mean that I don't have cravings. That doesn't mean that I don't have fantasies about going back and doing whatever. But I'll never be able to beat those demons without my decision making being clear. If I'm very emotional and I'm overly anxious or overly depressed or euphoric or whatever, I've got to be able to integrate those emotions successfully into my life in a healthy way. When drugs are introduced, when substances are introduced, it generally results in me making poor decisions, and either I want the emotions to continue to go high, or I want them to come down low, or in many cases, I want to stop the discomfort physically in my body. The terminology in neuroscience is whatever fires wires. And so, I get hit with the dopamine, and it fixes. And it's like, I know how to feel better. That does it. So the good thing though is you can create new neural pathways. And that's about renewing your mind. And that's about being a new creation. And that's about being a new individual in Christ. And that's the old things behind you and new things in front of you. That's the good news in this. The value of this type of talk and education that we're exploring this morning is just the fact that it's very important to understand how we're made, how we're wired, because it gives me an insight into how I got here. And if I know how I got here, just like a map, I can figure out how to get back home, how I can get back to the real me, the person that I know that I truly am, the true self. But to find the real you, the genuine, authentic you got to find out where you are right now. That's the way maps work. And that's what this level of education offers. It's just a way to look at the map. Because what do I want for each and every person in this room? I want you to find your way back to the man, to the person that you truly know that you are, to the life that you want, to the person of integrity and value that you walked away from at some point. That's the painful thing. And all these things in your head, I can never get back to that. And that's a lie. That's wrong. You can get back to that place. I can't go back home. I, I've burned the bridge. No, you can go back to a place. You can go back to a value. You can go back to a purpose. And sometimes, yeah, there's a lot of damage that's done, and you have to find new purpose and new meaning and a new home. Yeah, you do. Emotions generally aren't problems. Okay, even challenging emotions, difficult emotions, strong emotions, they're part of being human. If someone you care about in your life passes away, or if you lose something or someone in your life, it's only natural to grieve. It's a human emotion. There's nothing wrong with that. And so to block that emotion, to suppress that emotion, to deny that emotion is to deny the human experience. And that's when you become this walking zombie. So emotions become problems when they're blocked, they're overwhelming, and you go into the fight or flight. They're misinterpreted. You feel shame, but now it becomes your identity. You feel fear, but you say to yourself, "I must be weak. What's wrong with me?" Those are misinterpretations. And so what do? We disallow the emotion. We don't process the emotion. We suppress the emotion, and we become a zombie, some block. And so ideally in the human experience, I want to be able to sit with whatever it is. I don't care if it's anxiety or depression or remorse or regret, whatever the emotion is, I want to be able to sit with it a little bit, to understand it, and then to integrate it in a healthy way rather than just blocking it, denying it, suppressing it, or what we do sometimes in a Christian bubble, we overanalyze it, we spiritualize it. So I'll give you an example. I might talk to somebody at the mission, and I might talk to somebody and say, "Hey, how's it going?" And you'll maybe share that it's not going well, but then you want to immediately spiritualize it. But God is good, and God's a way maker where there is no way, and all that stuff's good, right? I mean, it's wonderful. But if that's what you're using to block emotion, suppress emotion, ignore emotion, you're just spiritually bypassing it, and that ugly stuff is still there. And like Freud said, you can bury the emotion, you can suppress it, but it's going to come back in uglier ways. There's no escaping it. So you don't escape it. You learn how to embrace it, sit with it, process it. It becomes part of you. And what at that point was your perceived weakness now can become your strength.
Thank you for listening to the Telos Care podcast. We hope today's conversation encouraged you to reach in and grow, and reach out to bring hope and healing to your community. Hit follow on social media to stay up to date, and hit subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode.